They told us not to summon it. They warned us that once it crossed the threshold of the void, there would be no turning back. But the warnings were too late. We were already out of options. The Varniks had breached our last defenses, and the skies above our dying planet flickered with ash and blood. We were cornered. And in that corner, with death on all sides, we did the unthinkable. The room was buried under 100 meters of reinforced rock, an ancient bunker older than any of our nations. Its lights flickered like dying stars. The console at the center still worked, somehow. Maybe it knew the time had come. Maybe it had been waiting. Counselor Trell's hands shook as she placed her identification crystal into the altar-shaped port. The ancient system hummed, and a pulse of red light swept over us. The glyphs carved into the metal floor began to glow, bright as molten steel. Around us, the chamber throbbed with heat. "You know what this means," she whispered. Her voice wasn't loud, but it sliced through the silence like a blade. "If we bring it here, we unleash a force even the Varniks fear. We might lose control." "We already lost control," I said. "I was just a scholar once. My name meant nothing outside the archives. But the war changed everything. Now I stood with generals, leaders, last-chance thinkers who had all watched everything they loved crumble. We didn't care about politics anymore. We just wanted to survive." "Activate the summoning," I said. The chamber screamed. No, not screamed. It howled. It sounded like a star dying. The glyphs flared, twisting the space around us. The light bent, then shattered. For a second, I saw things I don't want to remember. Shadows that had no source, teeth without mouths, time folding like broken paper. Then it came. The center of the chamber tore open. Something emerged from the rupture, dragging a storm with it. The thing looked like a man. But it wasn't. It had the shape, the height, the build, but everything about it screamed other. Its presence was suffocating. The air grew heavy. Metal groaned. Our knees buckled, not because of fear, but because some primal instinct deep in our bones told us, submit. The human stepped forward. It was naked, yet its skin was etched with symbols we couldn't understand. Its eyes, gods help us, they weren't even eyes. They were obsidian pits, bottomless, with distant galaxies turning inside them. It looked at us with curiosity, then disinterest, like we were insects and it had seen worse. Trell fell to her knees. "It worked," she gasped. "We summoned the human." It spoke. Its voice echoed inside our skulls instead of the air, like a thought you couldn't shut out. "You beg for the wrath that your ancestors sealed away." "We have no choice," I said. "The Varniks are about to end us. We need you." It tilted its head, almost amused. "You think I am your savior. I am not. I am your punishment." The air snapped with heat. In that moment I felt it, not just power, but rage, ancient, cold, controlled, but barely. This was a being created in war, perfected by suffering, and sealed away by its own kind because it was too much. And now we had brought it back. Outside the bunker, the Varniks' forces continued their advance, but something in the sky shifted. The clouds parted and the stars flickered. The enemy's dreadships began to slow, then tremble. The human turned its gaze upward. "They remember me," it said. A smile curled across its face. And for the first time in this long, endless war, we weren't the ones who were afraid. The human didn't ask for our plan. It didn't need to. It already knew what we wanted, what we were begging for. Vengeance. Survival. A last, impossible miracle in a universe that had already written our names in the dust. It moved past us without another word, its bare feet leaving blackened imprints in the stone floor. Every step sounded like thunder, like the universe itself shivered under its presence. I wanted to speak, to ask something, anything, but my throat locked up. Trell was still kneeling, trembling like a leaf. We were leaders, commanders, survivors of countless battles. But in that moment, we were nothing more than children watching a god wake up. Outside, alarms wailed. "The Varniks have landed in Sector 9, one of the technicians shouted. "We've lost contact with the Northern Defense Ring." I rushed to the console and stared at the incoming telemetry. Dreadships were descending like insects. Their weapons had already reduced our outposts to rubble. Fire bloomed across the map. The last resistance cells were being snuffed out like candles in the wind. We were witnessing extinction in real time. And then, the human stepped onto the platform at the center of the chamber. No weapons, no armor, just that awful calm, as if it had already seen the outcome, as if the fight had already ended in its mind. "You summoned me to destroy your enemy," it said. "But first, let me show you what you summoned." It raised a hand. The air turned solid, not hot, not cold. Solid. As if we were being pulled underwater, but there was no water, only pressure. Reality bent around its fingers, and the walls groaned. The lights exploded, everyone fell to the floor, and then it vanished, not in a blink. It simply wasn't there anymore. Gone. A second later, the skies opened. Through the trembling walls of the bunker, we could see the monitors, security feeds from orbit, shaky drone footage from the last surviving sky cams. And on every screen, the same thing was happening. The dreadships were burning. One by one, without warning, the great floating beasts that had haunted our skies for years, the ones that defied every weapon we threw at them, began to shudder. And then they cracked. Not from explosions, not from any kind of attack, we understood. It was like their atoms simply refused to hold together anymore. And then came the screams. The Varniks don't scream like we do. Their voices are deeper, metallic, filled with radio-borne pulses that shake your teeth. But in those transmissions, we heard something we had never heard before. Terror. "It walks again," one Varnik's captain hissed across an open channel. "The old blood walks the stars. It was sealed." Another voice cried out, broken. "The apex returns. The eater of empires, run, run!" The signal cut to static. Trell covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. What is it doing to them?" "It's reminding them," I said quietly. That's when the bunker shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. Lights flickered back online. Then, silence. A new presence filled the room. The human had returned. But something was different now. Its skin was glowing, like molten iron beneath fragile flesh. Its eyes shimmered like collapsing stars. Around it swirled something we couldn't see, but we could feel. A field of energy so dense, it felt like standing beside a collapsing sun. It looked hungry. "They ran," it said. "Then it's working," I said, breathless. "They're afraid of you." "They remember," it corrected. Trell stood, voice shaky. "Will you destroy the rest of them?" The human's gaze flicked to her, and in that instant she turned pale. "Not yet," it said. "First I must finish what I started." "What did you start?" I asked. Its smile returned, cold, hollow. "Justice," it said. "And justice begins not with the enemy, but with the cowards who let them rise." My heart stopped. "Wait," I said. "What are you talking about?" The lights dimmed. "You summoned a weapon," it whispered. "But weapons have no masters, only targets." And then we realized it wasn't just here for the Varniks. Silence swallowed the bunker like a void. We stood frozen, staring at the thing we had summoned, this human, now glowing like the heart of a dying star and slowly turning its gaze back on us. Trell's face went ghost white, and I felt something in my chest tighten. Not fear, not yet. Something worse. Recognition. Because we'd known, deep down, that it wouldn't come without a price. "You said justice," Trell spoke, her voice cracking. "But we didn't do this. The Varniks, they invaded," the human said coldly. "They conquered. But only after you betrayed yourselves." It turned away from us and began to walk slowly around the chamber, as if inspecting something beneath the surface, bones under the skin of the planet. "You think your history is clean, that you fought valiantly. But I see deeper. I see your ancestors bartering with the Varniks when it was convenient, selling out colonies for temporary peace, sacrificing the weak to buy yourselves another year." Trell was shaking her head now, tears streaming down her cheeks. "That wasn't us. That was generations ago. And now you wear their sins like heirlooms." The room dropped 10 degrees. Every screen flickered, glitching. On the main display, a massive Varniks flagship, the Wrathbringer, was falling through orbit in flames, tumbling like a stone toward the horizon. No weapons, no fleet, just one being, tearing it all apart. Still, the human looked unimpressed. "I was sealed away for a reason," it said. "You feared what I was. You feared what humanity became, too adaptable, too ruthless, too perfect at war. So they turned on me, locked me outside time, buried me under lies." Trell collapsed to her knees again. "We didn't know, please. We brought you back because we had no other choice." The human leaned down, inches from her. Its face was calm. But its eyes, those bottomless, galaxy-churning voids, they didn't blink. "You had a choice, and you made it too late." It stood straight again, and then turned to me. "And you, Scholar, do you still believe I came to save you?" I didn't answer, because in that moment I didn't know. I remembered the legends, the whispers in the archive about the old blood, the forbidden truth of what humans once were, before they were erased from the galactic record. Something the elder races feared so deeply they wiped out entire libraries just to keep the memory from spreading. Not extinct, just hidden. "I summoned you because I believed you'd kill them," I said. "Not us." The human smiled, the kind of smile that broke galaxies. "I will kill them," it said, "but I don't make promises beyond that." The alarms rang again. "New signal," a technician cried. "Massive surge from orbit. I think it's the Varniks High Command. They've retreated. Full withdrawal. They're leaving the system." Cheers erupted from the far corners of the room. People began hugging, shouting, breaking down in tears. But I didn't move. Neither did Trell. Because we both knew the truth. The Varniks hadn't just retreated. They'd fled. And not because they lost. Not because we won. They fled because something worse than them had returned. The human walked to the center of the room again and raised both hands. A strange hum filled the air. Deep, constant, like the core of a dying planet. Lights flickered. Consoles warped. "Where are you going?" I asked. "To the heart," it said. "The heart of what?" It looked back at me, and for the first time its voice softened, almost mournful. "To remind your kind what real humanity used to be." And then, with a crack like thunder being born, it vanished again. Only now, I wasn't afraid for the Varniks. I was afraid for us. The night sky burned red for hours after the Varniks fleet fled our orbit. Cities that had once been silent graveyards began to stir. Survivors crawled out from bunkers, craters, shadows. People looked up and saw something they hadn't in years, the enemy running. For the first time, they thought the war was ending. But the war hadn't ended. Something older than war had just begun. Back in the command center, Trell and I stared at the hollow space where the human had disappeared. The consoles glitched and stuttered, still recovering from the pressure it left behind. Static hissed from every communication line. No one dared to speak above a whisper. The technicians avoided our eyes. "Where's it going?" she asked quietly. I didn't answer at first. I knew. Deep down, I knew. The heart, not of the enemy, of our empire. The human had been brought to destroy the Varniks, but it had already made its judgment. In its eyes, the rot didn't start with them. It started with us. The leaders who watched colonies fall, who bartered with blood, who sanitized war into pretty numbers on a screen. The ones who buried the truth about what humans had once been. Trell and I took the next transport to Sector 1, the capital, the cradle of the Unified Council. We had to get ahead of it, warn them, stop it, if that was even possible. The journey should have taken 3 hours. It took 6. The transport kept stalling. Gravity currents rippled unnaturally. Something in the system was breaking, not violently but systematically, like someone was peeling the layers off reality one by one. By the time we arrived, the skies over the capital were already fractured. I mean that literally. There were cracks in the air, thin, glowing fault lines that shimmered like broken glass. Time moved weird around them, slowed in some places, jumped in others. People stood in the streets staring up, unsure if they were dreaming or dying. Then came the screaming. We followed the smoke. A government outpost was gone, just gone. Not destroyed, not exploded, erased. All that remained was a perfect black hole in the ground, smooth like glass, pulsing with heat. No bodies, no wreckage, just silence. A survivor clutched my arm as we approached the zone. "It looked like a man," she whispered, "but it wasn't. It didn't speak. It just looked at the outpost and it ended." She began sobbing. Trell pulled me aside. "This can't keep going. We need to speak to the council now." We made it through a dozen checkpoints. What was left of them, anyway. The military presence was frantic, desperate. Orders were being shouted without coherence. You could tell the commanders were panicking but trying not to show it. Soldiers don't usually fear a single enemy. But this wasn't war anymore. This was something biblical. Inside the council tower we found them. The high lords, the heads of state, the ancient bloodlines that had ruled since before the first Varniks contact. They looked like ghosts, huddled around displays showing the orbital wreckage, the abandoned Varniks ships, the fallout. "You!" Councillor Wren barked as we entered. "What did you unleash?" Trell stepped forward. "We had no choice. You summoned a monster," another one shouted. "You bypassed protocol, accessed forbidden archives." "Do you want to be alive or correct?" I snapped. "Because we were dying. You all sat here and let us bleed for years. You let entire systems fall. You waited for the Varniks to get bored. But they didn't. And when the end came, we acted." Wren stood. His face was red, shaking. "And now it's killing us." A tremor shook the chamber. Everyone fell silent. One of the aides, pale as a corpse, ran in. It's here." We all turned to the central display. A single figure was approaching the tower, alone, walking through crowds that parted like waves. No army, no ships, no threat. And yet every defense drone malfunctioned as it got close. Power grids shut down. Turrets turned to slag. The city was silencing itself, as if it knew who was coming. "It's not here to negotiate," I whispered. The human entered the base of the tower like a shadow. No one stopped it. No one could. Councillor Wren backed away. "Call the off-world reinforcements. Use everything." "Everything," the human said from behind him. He hadn't even seen it move. Wren froze. "You had everything," the human whispered, "and you built monuments to yourselves while your people died in dirt." With one step, the human was beside him. With the next, Wren was gone. Not killed, just removed, like a page torn from a book. The council chamber erupted in screams. But I didn't scream, because I finally understood. The human wasn't angry. It was disappointed. And that made it so much worse. The council chamber was chaos. After Wren vanished, the rest of the High Lords lost whatever calm they had left. Some tried to run. Others collapsed in place, babbling apologies to a force that didn't care about apologies. And a few just froze, eyes locked on the human as if they could bargain with fear. But it wasn't looking at them anymore. It turned to the massive windows that overlooked the capital and stared at the sky, where the last dreadship still burned in orbit, slowly breaking apart like a dying star. Trell whispered to me, barely moving her lips. "We have to stop this. It's unmaking everything. It doesn't care about guilt or innocence anymore." I didn't respond, because I wasn't sure I agreed. For decades, those in this chamber had ruled with indifference, trading human lives for strategic silence. They fed the Varnick's hope and let the rest of us bleed. And now, justice had a face, and it wasn't kind. It wasn't diplomatic. It wasn't even fair. It was human. The human turned back to the chamber. Its voice echoed in our minds, sharp and weightless. "Your reign is over. Your time has passed. The age of compromise ends now." Trell stepped forward, eyes wide but steady. "Then what replaces it? You?" The human tilted its head. "Not me. Them." The floor split, not cracked, peeled open like paper. Beneath the council tower, the foundation of the capital was exposed. Thousands of miles of buried slums, forgotten zones, ruined habitats where the people we had long ignored lived in shadows. For decades they had been kept hidden, out of sight, out of politics, out of power. Now they looked up. Every hollow screen in the city blinked to life, and the human's voice poured out. "You were abandoned, left to die, but you endured. You are not the forgotten. You are the future. You are the core." We watched it happen in real time. People rising, not with weapons, with presence, the oppressed, the poor, the silenced, marching from the edges of the city toward the tower, not to attack it, but to claim it. The human didn't lead them. It just unlocked them, like it had broken the spell that kept them obedient. Trell turned to me. "It's not just tearing down, it's giving something back." I nodded, stunned. This wasn't a weapon. It was a reckoning. But not everyone saw it that way. One of the younger counselors, a man named Valen, pulled a compact plasma pistol from his robes. He was shaking, sweat pouring down his face. "We can't let this thing rule us," he muttered. "It's not even one of us anymore." He aimed at the human's back. I moved too late, but the shot never hit. It froze in mid-air. The plasma beam hovered like a crystal of light. The human didn't even turn around. "You still think this is about control," it said calmly. "But I was never here to rule." It flicked a finger, and the plasma disintegrated into sparks. I was here to remember. And then it looked directly at Velen. "You chose fear. You always will." Velen didn't scream. He just disappeared. No pain, no sound. Gone. Trell collapsed into a seat, her voice small. "How does it know? Who deserves to stay and who doesn't?" I swallowed hard. "Because it remembers what humans used to be, before we became this." Outside, the marchers had arrived. Not a mob, not a riot, a rising. They filled the plaza below the tower, standing in silence, waiting, watching. The human walked to the edge of the council chamber and extended its arms. "These are your new architects," it said. "The ones who felt the cost, who earned the right to rebuild." One of the counselors gasped, realizing the truth. "It's ending the bloodline. Not in fire, not in war, but in silence. the silence of being replaced. The human turned back one last time. To build again, it said, you must first let the lie die. And then it stepped off the edge, not fell, descended, into the crowd, which parted and then closed around it. No violence, no applause, just beginning. No parades, no speeches, no declaration of victory. The day the human disappeared into the crowd, the war didn't end with a bang. It ended with a long, uneasy silence, like the galaxy was holding its breath. The council never reconvened. What was left of them either vanished, fled off-world, or simply stopped trying to cling to power. Some say the human marked them, not with death, but with irrelevance. Like ghosts in a new era, they were still alive, but no one listened to them anymore. The cities began to shift. You could feel it in the air, something raw, unfinished, alive. The people who had always lived beneath the foundation were climbing out of the cracks, not with weapons, but with hands, with tools, with ideas they were never allowed to speak out loud. And yet, no one celebrated. Because something bigger still loomed behind all of it. Something they didn't understand. Something human. The stories spread like wildfire. In the ruins of the Eastern Dome colonies, survivors spoke of a figure walking through radiation storms untouched, waking the comatose and breathing new life into poisoned lands. On the moons of Virex, refugees claimed a shadow moved through the camps at night, burning away the black market kings who sold children for parts. Everywhere the human went, power collapsed. Not through force, through memory. It didn't fight anymore. It reminded people, and that scared them more. I stayed behind in the capital, watching the shift unfold. Trell, too. She'd changed, quiet now, almost hollow. We spoke often, mostly at night, sitting near the edge of the old tower, where the council used to rule. Now it stood open, empty, and unguarded. We wanted a weapon, she said one night, but it gave us a mirror. She wasn't wrong. Every day people came to that tower, not to worship, not to lead, just to sit, to think, to speak. No guards, no permits. They told stories, shared losses, made decisions together. It wasn't perfect, but it was different. And then came the first real challenge. A military detachment from the fringe systems arrived, old loyalists to the unified council, armed, trained, and furious. They claimed the capital was in chaos, that the disappearance of the council was a threat to stability, that without central leadership the galaxy would fracture. They rolled tanks into the square. They broadcast demands. They fired warning shots into the air. But no one ran. The people stood still, silent, waiting. I stood among them, Trell beside me. She whispered, "It's testing us. This is the first real test." The commander of the detachment stepped forward, full uniform, eyes blazing. "You think this is freedom?" he shouted to the crowd. "You think you've built something? You've built nothing. You've thrown away order." I stepped forward, my heart pounding. Order built on whose bones? He raised his weapon. The people didn't flinch. And then, the sky changed. Not dark, not bright, just bent. A ripple in the air, a pulse of pressure. And there, behind the commander, the human appeared. Quiet, barefoot, face unreadable. The soldiers froze. It didn't speak to them, didn't threaten. It just walked between them, past the tanks, through the line of rifles. No one stopped it. They couldn't. Some of them dropped their weapons without realizing it. Others stared at their reflections in its presence, reflections of themselves they didn't like. When it reached the front, it turned to the crowd, and it bowed. Not a leader, not a god, just a man. The soldiers retreated the same day. Some joined the people, others disappeared. The human stayed only a few minutes longer, then vanished again. Trell whispered beside me, It's not here to lead. It's here to remind us how. And for the first time in a long time, I believed we might actually learn. Not everyone saw the human as salvation. For every colony that rose from the ashes, for every city that reclaimed its voice, there were those in the shadows watching with envy, or worse, fear, because something ancient had returned, not just power, not just memory, but a reminder of what humanity once was when it had nothing left to lose. And the galaxy doesn't like reminders, especially ones it can't control. In the fractured remains of the former Outer Reach Coalition, deep beyond the dead sectors, a syndicate known as the Crimson Rung began to whisper a dangerous idea. If the human could be summoned, it could be captured. Or worse, replicated. They weren't fools. They'd seen what it did to the Varnics, to the Council, to reality itself. But they didn't see a guardian or an avenger. They saw an opportunity. They brought it back once, said their leader, a former exoscientist turned techno-occultist named Rival. We'll bring it back bound. They didn't want justice. They wanted leverage. Trell and I caught wind of this through old contacts, resistance fragments who'd turned into messengers between the new city cores forming across liberated worlds. Something was stirring out there in the void. Something loud, ugly, desperate. They're building something, a scout told us in hushed tones. A gate, not a summoning like you did, a trap, a prism chamber designed to contain the human's resonance. Trell's face went pale. Idiots, she whispered. They don't understand what they're trying to cage. I nodded. They're not ready for what it'll do to them, or the galaxy. We sent word. Quietly. Carefully. But rumors spread faster than warnings. Across the rim, factions started to emerge, some who wanted to worship the human, others who wanted to weaponize it. Old warlords painted its image on their flags, pretending they understood what it stood for. Rogue empires saw it as a threat to their rule, and began launching probes into deep sectors, trying to trace where it vanished between appearances. And through it all, it said nothing. The human was silent. Until it wasn't. It reappeared on Laeran V, a desert planet once turned into a Varnix labor camp. Now freed, its people were rebuilding from bone and rust, using old tech to stitch together new hope. But one night, a red moon rose early. The air thickened. Static filled the sky, and the human walked out of the sandstorm. The entire colony stopped. It didn't speak. It moved through them like wind, silent and slow, pausing only when it reached the central node tower. There, it placed its hand on the core crystal, and for a second, everything on the planet froze, not died, just paused. Time, breath, motion, all still. When it released the crystal, the lights surged back, systems realigned. The colony evolved. New structures appeared, formed from raw materials they hadn't even mined yet. Power grids fused with organic design, and every screen across the colony displayed a single phrase. Remember what you were meant to become. It wasn't just fixing things, it was accelerating them, unlocking latent potential, pushing evolution forward. But the Crimson Rung didn't see beauty in that. They saw energy, data, something to extract, like blood from a god. Rival's trap went active 3 cycles later. It wasn't subtle. They broadcast its activation across pirate frequencies, knowing the bait would travel faster that way. They used broken tech from Varnix wreckage, spliced with old human mythos, fragments of the first summoning, stolen notes, corrupted echo scripts from our chamber. I didn't know what they expected, but I knew what they'd get. The trap flared open in Sector Black 9. A singularity chamber formed, designed to contain thought, memory, identity, everything the human was. And just as they planned, it answered. Not as a man, not as a figure, but as a wave. Reality buckled, Half of the Rung's fleet vanished instantly. The rest turned on itself, ships consuming their own crews, AI screaming in code no one could understand. Rival tried to run. He didn't make it. The chamber remained. But it was hollow. Not broken, not burned. Just emptied of meaning. The human wasn't there. It had never really been there. It left behind only one message, etched into the inside walls of their prism trap. You cannot bind what remembers its freedom. Trell and I read the report in silence. The room was dim. The air felt heavier. They keep thinking it's a thing, she murmured. Something to own. To break. I stared at the screen. But it's not. No, she said. It's a lesson, and some of us still haven't learned it. They say endings are quiet, but this one didn't come like a whisper. It came like a memory being ripped open. 3 months after the Crimson Rung failed to trap it, the human stopped appearing. No ripples in the air. No lights bent out of shape. No messages carved into stone or burned into sky. It vanished like a ghost that had finished its haunting. And in its absence, something strange happened. We began to change. Not through fear, but through realization. The colonies once fighting for scraps began forming their own councils. People started rebuilding with materials they used to sell for survival. Communities that once hid underground returned to the surface and rewrote their laws without nobility, without ranks. No thrones, no flags, just people, learning again how to listen. For a moment, I thought maybe that was the human's gift, not salvation, but silence. It forced us to look at what was left when the monsters fled and the kings disappeared. It didn't come to save us. It came to leave us with ourselves. But peace doesn't last in empires built on bones. A new power began to rise from the galactic edge, a union of fringe worlds untouched by the human's appearances, untouched by its lessons. They called themselves the Steel Path, and they believed what had happened was weakness. They said the human was a myth, a fabrication used to dismantle the order that kept people in line. They started swallowing up free systems. Fast. And this time, they came not with dreadships or screams, but with cold logic and brutal precision. They offered unity, a chance to return to hierarchy, safety in exchange for surrender. Sound familiar? Some took the offer. Most didn't, but resistance had grown fragile again. People began to wonder, would the human return? I was in the city of Vareth when the answer came. I felt it before I saw it. Everyone did. Like a pressure in your chest, like grief being pulled back through time. The sky cracked again, but this time it didn't bleed light. It reflected. A mirror opened above the skyline, and from it, he stepped through. Not glowing, not furious, just present, barefoot, calm. The human walked down the center of the plaza, and the city stopped breathing. The Steel Path had already occupied the outer sectors. Their ships were in orbit. Their diplomats were in the capital, and their soldiers were posted at the plaza gates. When they saw him, they raised their weapons. He didn't blink. The commander stepped forward, armored in steel-gray plating, voice amplified by comms. "You are unregistered. Identify yourself." The human smiled, not warm, not cruel, just knowing. "I have no name," it said. "Only memory." "Then you are a threat to order." "No," the human said softly. "I am the proof that your order was never real." The soldiers opened fire, and the city watched as every round, every energy bolt, every tactical burst turned to petals before reaching his skin, falling harmlessly to the ground. Steel became pollen. Fire became mist. He kept walking. "Your empire is not new," he said. "It is a painting overwrought. You replaced one throne with another and called it peace." The commander drew his blade. The last show of arrogance. The human never touched him. He looked at the blade. And it unraveled. Not melted. Not snapped. Just undone. The atoms that made it remember being part of a mountain. And the mountain never wanted to kill. The commander fell to his knees. The human reached down and touched his forehead. "You are not my enemy," he said. "You are my echo. But echoes fade." The entire Steel Path fleet deactivated in orbit. No fire, no boom. They simply went dark, like a switch had been flipped in every system that remembered how to fear. And the people, once again, were left standing in the light. Trell found me in the crowd after. Her face was tired, hopeful. "It didn't fight them," she said. "It didn't need to," I replied. "It just reminded them they never mattered." And then, just like that, the human looked up one last time, at us, as if asking, "Do you remember now?" And then it vanished. No storm, no scream, no scar, just the air and silence and the weight of our choices returned to our hands. That was the last time anyone saw it. But sometimes, when the stars go quiet, when the air gets too still, I swear I feel it nearby, not watching, just waiting. Not for war, not for revenge, just for the day we finally prove we no longer need it. The galaxy didn't really know what to make of humans. They were a relatively new addition to the Galactic Council. Quiet, polite, almost too agreeable. Not particularly large, not especially strong. No claws or venom, no telepathy or bone armor like the Sulkai. What they did have, however, was an unshakable weirdness. That eerie kind of calm you only see in predators just before they strike. But most species chalked it up to Earth's chaotic past. Dozens of wars, collapses, rebuilds, tragedies, and triumphs. Humans were tolerated, respected even, but never feared. That was their mistake. It started when the Grail Dominion sent a scout team to the Outer Rim, looking for a resource-rich system they could quietly strip mine. They weren't looking to start a war, just bend the rules a bit, push the edge. Everyone did it. And when they found an isolated little backwater planet with a primitive human colony, they didn't think twice. 6 Grail dropships descended onto Tarsus 4. The humans there had no military, no weapons visible. Just farms, small towns, a few old spaceports. Children ran in dusty fields, and laughter echoed from broken radios. Easy pickings. So they landed. Commander Drextai of the Grail, battle-hardened and decorated, had done this dozens of times. He didn't even bother deploying shock troopers first. Just a show of force from the air, and a broadcast message ordering compliance. No response. So they sent in a few drones to sweep the perimeter. Half didn't return. Then the scout team disappeared. It was supposed to be a silent annexation. Quick, clean, no mess. But Tarsus 4 went dark after that. Not a single transmission, not even distress signals, just static. The Dominion got worried and dispatched a battle cruiser. What they found was wreckage. Grail ships burned in craters. Their command center had been pulled apart, literally, metal bent outward like someone had exploded inside it. Troopers were scattered in pieces across the landscape, some missing heads, others twisted in impossible ways. No energy signatures, no heat trails, no explosives, just death. The humans were gone. Not dead. Gone. Vanished. No bodies, no signs of retreat. Just the occasional bloody handprint on metal and words scratched in broken Graal armor. One word kept showing up. Awakened. The Council tried to bury the incident, pretend it never happened. But whispers spread. Whispers that humans had something locked deep in their DNA, something ancient and terrible. Something even they didn't understand. War memories. Battle instincts. Muscle memory from 1,000 years of killing each other. all buried, dormant, forgotten, until someone kicked in the door. The next time the Grail tried to make contact with Earth directly, a massive black ship emerged from the human sector. It wasn't in any database. No call signs, no IFF codes, just sleek obsidian hull and glowing red thrusters. It broadcast one thing. You touched the temple, you woke the gods, and then it fired. The beam cut the Grail cruiser in half, clean, precise, like a knife through butter. No warning, no conversation, no diplomacy. The council scrambled. Every species started re-evaluating their treaties with humans. Even the war-hardened Volcari closed their borders, because no one knew what the hell had just been unleashed. And somewhere, in the core of Earth, a hidden AI awakened systems that had slept for centuries. Vaults opened, files decrypted, human names, old bloodlines marked with red. The awakening had begun, and the gods were not happy. They came at night, not from the stars this time, but from beneath Earth itself. Old bunkers, some thought to be relics of wars long past, rumbled to life. Across continents, hidden doors slid open, and machines that hadn't moved in centuries stretched their limbs. Massive humanoid constructs powered by fusion cores, drones with minds of their own, infantry suits with dried blood still on the inside. And the humans didn't even know. Not yet. Most of them were still asleep, still unaware of what was happening out in the deep dark of space. Earth's official line was silence. No news of the Tarsus incident, no mention of the Grail. The few who knew, the old guards, the buried Black Ops divisions, the last remnants of Project Revenant, they were the ones preparing. Quietly, efficiently, like they'd been waiting for this moment. And they had. See, a long time ago humans had learned something terrible, that peace wasn't a guarantee. It was a break, a lull in the storm. So they hid things. Not just weapons, not just machines. They hid instincts, buried codes inside their DNA, locked entire battle doctrines inside neural backups, created command protocols only accessible if humanity was under existential threat. They were never meant to be opened again. Until Tarsus. In the ruined skies of the former U.S. territories, Commander Aaron Voss stared up at a darkening cloud that wasn't cloud at all. It was a carrier-class sleeper fleet rising out of Lake Superior. The lake drained in hours. Ships that had been built underwater beneath the radar, beneath the knowledge of even Earth's current governments, took to the air. She didn't command them. She didn't have to. They remembered. Voss tapped into her retinal feed, and her screen blinked once. Revenant protocol active. She hadn't heard those words since she was a kid, since her father, one of the last engineers of the old era, warned her that if the protocol ever came back online, it meant the gods were stirring. Gods. That's what he called them. She never believed him until now. Across the planet, those like her were getting the same ping. Old bloodlines, soldiers who'd never served, scientists who'd never published, people with a quiet sense of being different, stronger, smarter, quicker to violence. They'd always assumed it was trauma, genetics, maybe too much caffeine. But it wasn't. It was the war gene. The lock had broken, and the universe was about to learn what it meant when war gods didn't ascend to battle. They remembered it. Back on Tarsus 4, the lone surviving Grail, General Drextai, floated in a stasis pod aboard a scavenger ship. He wasn't dead. Not yet. But his mind was broken. He whispered constantly to himself in the Grail tongue, repeating fragments that barely made sense. They weren't warriors. They were machines. Inside meat. They smiled while they killed us. They smiled. The scavengers didn't know what to make of him. They'd picked up the distress signal weeks after the fighting stopped. found the general wandering a burned-out crater with his armor torn off, and his claws snapped backward. One of them, a young Vari technician, patched together his translator, hoping to get something useful. Drextai looked right at him and said, in perfect, shaking Terran standard, "Run, before they know you were here. Run, little one. The gods have teeth." The tech froze. And far away, on Earth, in an underground vault beneath what used to be Berlin, a door slammed open, not by command, by instinct. A man stepped out, eyes black as midnight, skin pale from decades in stasis. No rank, no name, just a single marking on his wrist. Sovereign Unit 01, Alpha Human. He looked up at the stars, and he remembered war. The stars looked different to Alpha. He'd seen them once through the cracked window of a burning orbital station, back when space was red with blood and debris. Now they were quiet, distant, unknowing. He stood barefoot on the cold stone floor of the Berlin vault, breathing slowly, like he was waking from a long, violent dream. Lights flickered to life as he moved. Systems still recognizing his DNA, still obeying the ancient hierarchy coded into their circuits. He wasn't the leader of any army. He was the army. Alpha wasn't born in the normal sense. He was built, back when Earth thought it could outcreate extinction, back when humans played with evolution like clay. He was part of the Sovereign Program, humanity's desperate answer to an interstellar extinction threat that never came. Or so they thought. The program was shut down, buried, erased from public records. The Sovereigns were put into deep stasis, sealed in bunkers and locked behind protocols no government dared to test. Too powerful, too unstable, too human. And now Alpha was awake, which meant the seal had been broken. As he stepped into the light, satellite feeds poured into his neural implants. Data flooded his vision. Tarsus destruction logs, emergency pings from Revenant-linked bloodlines, reports of old sleeper tech activating across Earth. And one image, a Grail ship, cleaved in half above Titan. No warning, no survivors. Alpha tilted his head. The war had already started. He stepped outside, into the dead city above. Berlin was quiet, too quiet. Buildings still stood, but the people were gone. Evacuated. Or maybe hiding. It didn't matter. He wasn't looking for them. He was looking for her. Aaron Voss sat on the bridge of the newly reactivated Revenant-class battleship Hellwake. It had no official launch record, no registry. Built in orbit decades ago, cloaked and silenced, it now roared with a hunger it was never supposed to feel again. She'd followed the signals here. Berlin. The final vault. And as she hovered just above the ruins, sensors pinged. A single human life form. Her eyes widened. Alpha. She didn't know what he looked like. No one did. The Sovereign files were locked behind quantum encryptions that even modern Earth couldn't crack. But she felt it. Something about the feed. The vitals. It wasn't just another bloodline. This one led them all. Voss landed hard, deploying drones to form a perimeter. She stepped out herself, against every protocol, heart pounding like a war drum. She found him standing atop a collapsed rooftop, staring up at her ship. He didn't speak right away, just studied her. "You have war in your bones," he said finally. Aaron swallowed. "And you have it in your breath." Alpha smiled. A tiny thing, like someone remembering a song. "You came for me?" "I came to stop this." He stepped toward her, eyes glinting. "You can't. None of us can. The temple is open." Behind them, one of the drones beeped. Inbound transmission, encrypted, human origin but old code. Pre-collapse level. Even Alpha narrowed his eyes. Voss accessed it. The voice on the other end was ragged, desperate. "This is Doctor. Hammond from Site Echo 9. We've got movement. Multiple vaults are breaking open. One in Alaska, one under the Mariana Trench, and something in Antarctica. Not human, not fully. They're waking up too. They remember us. They're afraid. Voss looked at Alpha. You know what this means? He nodded slowly. They're not afraid of us. They're afraid of what we were. And we're about to show them we still are. Far across the system, on the edge of the Kuiper Belt, a long-forgotten alien observatory blinked to life. Its ancient caretaker species, a withered, passive civilization of data archivists, watched the feeds in horror. Humanity has reactivated, one whispered, and they remember the war. The temple door was kicked open. Now the gods were walking. The black site in Antarctica had been silent for nearly 2 centuries. It was never on any map, never part of any country. The ice had swallowed it, preserved it. They said the cold was necessary, not just for secrecy, but to keep whatever was inside asleep. Not dead, not dismantled, just delayed. But now the ice cracked, not from the outside, but from within. Massive plates of glacial armor shifted and split. Out of a jagged wound in the earth rose a structure forged of carbon steel and something darker, older, metal that had no rust, symbols that predated known languages. Lights flickered in cold colors, casting long shadows against the snow. Something was waking. Dr. Hammond, still huddled inside Echo 9's control room, watched the seismic readings spike off the charts. His face was soaked in sweat despite the sub-zero temperatures. They said it was a myth, he muttered to himself, hands shaking over the console. They said Project Eidolon was just Cold War paranoia. It wasn't. Project Eidolon was humanity's greatest mistake, besides creating the sovereigns. It was older, dirtier, less about building gods and more about copying one. Back during Earth's second collapse, someone had found remnants of something, an alien thing buried deep beneath the ice. Not alive, not exactly dead. It wasn't mechanical, but it wasn't organic either. It wasn't from here. Scientists tried to reverse engineer it, contain it, understand it. But the more they studied it, the more it watched them back. And eventually they stopped digging, locked the whole facility under miles of frozen wasteland, and passed it down as legend. Until now. The power readings spiked again. Doors in the deep cracked open. Something massive stirred in the pit below. Metal clanked. Lights died. And then came the first sound from within the tomb. A single word broadcast into every active revenant frequency. Father. Back on the Hellwake, Alpha went still. Erin looked up from her HUD, heart stuttering. What is that? Alpha's voice turned low. Flat. Something that should never have learned to speak. Thousands of kilometers above, in orbit, the galactic observation station Tara-Nur was under lockdown. The alien species stationed there, observers from the peacekeeping Sarathi Order, had never raised weapons in thousands of years. But when Earth's signals began pulsing, when the word father repeated across systems they'd long labeled dead zones, they armed everything. Because they knew what it meant. The last time that word had echoed through the stars, it had ended a star system. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that humans didn't send the signal. Something imitated them. Erin stared at Alpha. You knew this could happen? I hoped it wouldn't. You hoped? His eyes were dark pools of memory. Before the sovereigns, before we were perfected, Earth tried something else, something raw, something more alien than human. They called it the prototype. It wasn't a weapon, it was a mirror. Erin's voice dropped. A mirror of what? Of what they feared we'd become. The ground shook again. In Antarctica, the buried vault exploded upward, A column of energy shot into the sky, burning a hole through the atmosphere. Light flared in alien shapes. Snow melted for kilometers. And from the heart of that rising inferno stepped a figure. 9 feet tall, human-shaped, but wrong. Too symmetrical, too smooth. No mouth, no nose, just a blank face with eyes that flickered like black stars. The being looked around at the frozen wasteland, flexed its long, perfect fingers, and then smiled. Not with a face, but with the sky. Above it, clouds twisted. Electricity bloomed in unnatural patterns. Radio towers began screaming, and all across the earth, revenant agents fell to their knees, clutching their heads. Visions, nightmares, flashes of war that had never happened, but might. Aaron doubled over, gripping the rail. "What is it doing?" Alpha was silent. He didn't move. He just stared at the sky. "He's remembering," he said quietly. Aaron's breath caught. "Who?" Alpha turned toward her, his voice not quite human. "The first god." And from the pit of the earth, a voice thundered in every human's mind. "You were made in my image. Now remember who made me." The world didn't end in fire. Not yet. It ended in memory. Across Earth, people dropped mid-step, on sidewalks, in offices, on subway trains. Eyes rolled back, mouths open in silent screams. Their minds flooded with images that didn't belong to them. Wars they hadn't fought, weapons they'd never touched, battles that had never happened. A boy in Nairobi wept as he saw his own hands, aged and scarred, plunge a plasma spear into an alien queen. An old woman in Kyoto collapsed as she relived the orbital siege of a planet named Virelia, where humans had fought until every last starship melted in its own exhaust. And a 6-year-old girl in the new Santiago colonies screamed the names of people no one alive had ever known. Alpha stood at the center of it all, unmoved. The sky above Berlin churned like a storm with a will of its own. It wasn't weather. It was signal, a transmission buried so deep in human consciousness that not even the sovereign program had dared touch it. Voss clutched the railing of the Hellwake, her knuckles white. All around her, officers were on the ground, twitching or crying out. Only a few, those with revenant lineage, were still standing. Barely. "Alpha," she hissed. "What the hell is he doing to us?" "He's not attacking," Alpha said quietly. "He's unlocking." "What?" "Eidolon isn't a weapon. It's a key, a trigger. It was designed to wake us all up." Voss stared at him, stunned. "You knew this?" "I was never supposed to remember," Alpha said. "But I do now. I remember everything." He turned his eyes toward the sky, where the signal crackled and spiraled through satellites, bouncing across jump relays into the far corners of human space. "This isn't war," he whispered. "This is reclamation." Voss's comms lit up again. Fragmented, static, warped. A voice she recognized. Dr. Hammond. "Can't stop it. It's rewriting them. Reprogramming. No, listen to me. The prototype wasn't alone. There are others, buried, waiting. It was a seed." The message cut out. A silence heavier than any death followed. Voss swallowed hard. "Alpha, you said he was the first god. What does that make us?" Alpha turned to her. "The children who forgot their father." She felt it then. Not in her head, but in her bones. Like someone knocking from inside her ribcage. A pulse of heat, a command without words. Old memories flickering at the edge of her vision. Not hers, but part of her. She wasn't a soldier. She'd never killed anyone. But her hands remembered how to. In deep orbit, the Council of Zeros held emergency talks. Species from 100 systems shouted across glowing chambers. Threat levels were raised. Protocols for galactic quarantine triggered. The word Earth was now spoken like a curse. One of the Sarathi ambassadors slammed his clawed hand on the table. This is what we feared. This is why we restricted them. The humans were never civilized. They were asleep. And now they're dreaming again. Another delegate, from the crystalline Vari, trembled visibly. Their dreams burned stars. No one had an answer, only panic, until one voice, old and calm, cut through the noise. The Threngor elder, oldest of the council. He leaned forward on his bone staff, eyes gray with memory. We did not survive the last war of the first flame. We merely watched it pass us by, he said. If the humans have found the echo, if Eidolon breathes again, then it is not war we face. He stood, slow and deliberate. It is extinction, and this time, it's theirs to decide. Back on Earth, Alpha walked through the ash and ruin of Berlin toward the signal source. Every step he took, machines rose to meet him, ancient warbots with rusted joints straightening, auto-turrets bowing their barrels like priests. Ahead of him, in a crater of ice and smoke, Eidolon stood, still smiling. It cocked its head as Alpha approached. No sound came from its mouthless face, but Alpha heard it anyway. I knew you'd wake. Alpha didn't respond with words. He raised his hand. The sky split. Above them, a hole tore open in space, not from tech, but from will. The sovereign fleet, long dormant, shimmered into existence, row after row of black ships, silent, waiting. Alpha spoke at last. Then let the gods finish what they started. The sky over Earth fractured. To most, it looked like a storm, black clouds curving unnaturally, lightning that moved like veins across the atmosphere. But to the few who still remembered what true war looked like, it was a summoning. The kind humanity had sworn never to perform again. Above Berlin, the sovereign fleet descended, each ship a sleek monolith of obsidian and red glow veins, shaped like daggers pointed straight at the heart of the universe. They didn't make noise. They didn't broadcast greetings. They simply arrived, like a memory you never asked for but couldn't forget. On board the Hellwake, Commander Aaron Voss stared in mute awe. Hundreds of ships now hovered in Earth's lower orbit. No government had built them. No registry claimed them. They belonged to no one. And yet every revenant bloodline felt them. Alive. Watching. Waiting. Alpha stood before Eidolon in the center of Berlin's scorched ruin. The city around them was frozen in time, like it knew this moment wasn't meant to be seen. He stared up at the fleet, then back at the silent figure before him. "You've awakened them all," Alpha said. Eidolon's response echoed in his skull, not as words, but emotion. Satisfaction, hunger, pride. "I lit the fire, but you, Sovereign, you are the flame." In the pit where Eidolon had risen, machines stirred, not Earth's, not human. They were smooth, organic in movement, spider-like with long silver limbs. Each of them moved like dancers in a ritual, forming patterns around Eidolon. "Those aren't ours," Voss whispered into comms, watching from orbit. "What are they?" "Hybrids," Alpha replied, over the channel. "Failed children of the first flame. Eidolon tried to replicate itself, with other species." Voss inhaled sharply. "You mean—" "Yes," Alpha said. "Aliens." The truth hit hard. Eidolon hadn't been alone all these years. While Earth slept, it experimented, reaching across the dark void, harvesting minds, testing limits. It wanted a new pantheon, a new family. But nothing matched the chaos of humanity. Eidolon stepped forward now, its voice calm and vast inside Alpha's head. "You were meant to conquer the stars. They tried to silence you, chain you, make you forget. But I remembered." Alpha clenched his fists. Power rippled under his skin like a storm begging to break. "You remembered wrong." And then it moved. Not Eidolon, but Alpha. One blink, and he was across the crater, fist smashing into the prototype's chest with the force of a collapsing building. The hybrids scattered as energy blasted outward in a perfect circle. The earth shook, ice cracked for miles. Eidolon flew backward, skidding through what remained of Berlin's ancient walls, metal shrieking against stone. But it didn't fall apart. It stood, slow and deliberate, and tilted its head. Good. Above them, the sovereign fleet came to life. Engines flared red. Cannons swiveled. Targeting systems locked onto the hybrids below. The ships didn't wait for orders. They were the orders. From the Hellwake, Voss watched it unfold. "Alpha, if you do this—" "I'm not starting a war," he growled. "I'm finishing a betrayal." And then Earth's sky turned red. Sovereign ships opened fire, not with lasers but with graviton torches, beams of gravity shaped into spears that pierced matter on a molecular level. The hybrids were shredded in seconds. Screams echoed, not from mouths, but from minds. Eidolon dodged easily, dancing through ruin like it had done this before. Alpha followed. They clashed in mid-air, no longer bound to the ground. Two forces meant to end worlds. Alpha moved like a man possessed, like war itself had wrapped itself in human flesh and said, "Try me." Eidolon didn't defend. It learned. With every hit, every strike, it adapted, moved faster, grew smarter. Voss could see it happening. "He's copying you, Alpha. It's learning your patterns." "I know," Alpha said, breathing hard. "That's the point." "Then why are you—" "I'm teaching him how to lose." Deep in space, on the edge of the Orion Rift, alien species began evacuating systems near human borders. No diplomatic envoys, no questions, just silence and flight. The old fear had returned. Not of Earth, of what sleeps inside it. Back on the surface, Eidolon finally spoke aloud. Its voice shook the building still standing. "You cannot destroy me. I am your reflection." Alpha's eyes burned. His voice echoed with something older than words. "Then it's time to break the mirror." The mirror shattered. Alpha struck with such force the sound vanished. No thunder, no crash, just silence. Total, complete silence, as his fist connected with the center of Eidolon's chest. The being jerked mid-air, convulsing, its limbs flailing in unnatural directions as invisible shockwaves tore through the atmosphere. Space rippled around them like a cracked lens. Energy pulsed out from the point of impact, racing across Berlin, then Europe, then the world. And Eidolon screamed, not with a voice, not with a mouth. It screamed through every human who carried the war gene. Across the earth, revenant bloodlines howled in agony. Some dropped unconscious, others wept. A few laughed maniacally before their minds snapped back into place. Generations of genetic memory, once dormant, suddenly surged with unbearable heat. Old instincts burning brighter than ever. In orbit, on the bridge of the Hellwake, Aaron Voss gripped the railing, trying to breathe. "Systems are shorting," her lieutenant called out. "Something's scrambling the neural links. We're losing control of the Revenant fleet." Voss turned to her AI command interface. "Override it!" "I can't," the AI hissed. "It's not a system failure, it's genetic synchronization. Eidolon is triggering a full cascade." Alpha was right. This wasn't war. This was a reawakening. Below in the storm-lit sky, Alpha and Eidolon clashed again and again. Blurs of motion, trails of energy arcing across the sky like falling stars. Eidolon had stopped mimicking. It was improvising now, striking low, shifting form mid-fight, arms stretching into blades, a second spine extending from its back as it stabbed with cruel precision. Alpha was faster, but not invincible. Eidolon's blades grazed him. Deep gashes tore through his side, glowing briefly before his skin sealed over with nanite-accelerated healing. Blood spilled anyway. Not ordinary blood. War blood. It hit the ground in fat black drops that sizzled and burned craters into the stone. Where it fell, machines awoke. Ancient defense turrets, long rusted, powered up. Drones buried for decades rose on humming grav pads. The Earth was remembering him too. Voss staggered to the comms. "Alpha, you're bleeding." "I'm seeding," he growled through clenched teeth. "This planet was built to recognize us. It's part of the system. It was always part of the system." Above them, the Sovereign fleet began descending, fast. Not for battle, for reinforcement. Drop pods broke atmosphere like meteors. Each one carried a revenant soldier, those few who had survived the awakening with minds intact. Sleeper elites, children of war, bloodlines unbroken. They landed in silence, surrounding the crater where Alpha and Eidolon fought. No commands were given, no orders, they knew. Because now, they remembered too. One stepped forward, a tall, scarred woman with glowing red eyes. She didn't salute. She just spoke one word. "Permission?" Alpha, still locked in battle mid-air, ducked a strike and answered with a voice like cracking steel. "Granted," she leapt. The revenants charged. Eidolon barely turned before the first impact hit. 20 revenants at once, striking with synchronized fury. No weapons, no shields, just raw, brutal martial precision. The being staggered under their weight, its limbs twisting, body glowing with unstable energy as it tried to recalculate. But it was too late. The mirror had cracked, and now the shards were cutting back. Far beyond, in deep space, a cloaked grail listening post picked up the signal spike. One of the technicians turned to their commander, face pale with fear. "Sir, Eidolon's failing. The prototype is losing." The commander stared blankly. "That's not possible." The humans, they're winning." The commander stood slowly. "Then we run, before they remember we exist." And he gave the only order the Graal Dominion had never issued before. "Evacuate, all systems, abandon observation, burn everything, do not leave any trace." Back on Earth, Eidolon screamed again, this time with rage, lashing out with an energy pulse that vaporized 10 revenants instantly. But more replaced them, dozens, then hundreds. Voss watched from orbit, hands shaking. "They're multiplying." "No," said the AI, voice hushed. "They're returning. The war gene is pulling from deep code, recreating warriors lost in the collapse. These aren't just revenants, these are originals." Eidolon fell to one knee. Alpha descended, surrounded now by a circle of blood-bonded soldiers. "It's over," Alpha said. Eidolon looked up, for the first time unsure. "I gave you power." Alpha's eyes flared. "You gave us chains, and we turned them into blades." Then he stepped forward, fist glowing white-hot with compressed gravity, drawn from the sovereign core above, and struck. The world held its breath. Alpha's fist, wrapped in blazing white gravity, connected with the core of Eidolon's chest. And this time, there was no silence, no delay, no subtle pulse of power. The earth itself cried out. A thunderclap erupted so loud it shattered glass across 3 continents. The impact cracked the bedrock beneath Berlin, creating a chasm that split the city in 2. A wave of pure kinetic force rippled outward, flattening buildings, toppling ancient statues, and ripping trees from their roots. And at the center of it all, Eidolon fell. Not gracefully, not like a god surrendering to fate. It collapsed, its limbs convulsed, the smooth perfection of its body twisted and fractured, black liquid sprayed from the wound in its chest, hissing as it hit the ground. The hybrids, still clinging to their creator like lost children, screeched and folded inward, their forms unraveling into ash. The revenants stood still, forming a perfect ring around the dying being, weapons lowered, breathing heavy. Blood dripped from torn armor and singed skin, but no one spoke. They didn't need to. Alpha stood above Eidolon now, breathing deeply, his chest rising and falling like thunderclouds in a storm. His fists smoked with raw energy. His eyes glowed brighter than ever. Twin coals pulled from the center of a dying star. Eidolon raised a trembling hand, fingers twitching like a marionette in its final dance. "Why? Did you stop dreaming?" Alpha knelt beside it. "I didn't," he whispered. "You turned our dreams into nightmares." Eidolon's body began to dissolve, its perfect structure breaking down into streams of light and data. Its final words came not in speech, but a single echo that brushed through every revenant's mind like a dying breeze. "We could have ruled together." Alpha didn't answer. He just closed his eyes. And when he opened them again, Eidolon was gone. Not dead in the traditional sense, unwritten, erased from the system that once gave it form. The echoes in the sky faded. The churning storm above Earth finally stilled. Peace, at last. But it wasn't quiet. Because across the globe, the awakening hadn't stopped. It had only begun. In orbit, the Hellwake's systems slowly recovered. Erin Voss slumped into her chair, sweat coating her skin. "Casualty report?" she asked. The AI responded, voice calm again. 72% of activated revenants survived. 17% lost to neural overload. 11% missing. Status unknown. Unknown? They changed. Too much. Left the gene spectrum entirely, possibly ascended. Voss exhaled. "And Alpha?" "Alive," the AI replied. "But not the same." Alpha stood at the edge of the crater, watching the sunrise break through ash and ruin. The revenants behind him were silent, their faces caught somewhere between awe and fear. They had followed him into death, and he had pulled them back out. Voss arrived minutes later, dropping from an orbital shuttle. Her boots crunched in the shattered stone as she approached. "You okay?" she asked. Alpha turned to her. Something in his gaze was no longer entirely human. "No," he said, "but neither is the world." She looked around at the destruction. What happens now? Alpha was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke with the gravity of history behind his words. "Now we rebuild, but not the way we did before. No more lies, no more erasing what we are. We were made for war, but we choose what we do with that." Voss nodded slowly. "And the galaxy?" Alpha's eyes flickered towards the stars. "They heard us. They felt us. Some will flee, others will come. But this time, when they knock..." He clenched his fist. "We answer as gods." In the outer reaches of space, transmissions from Earth echoed through thousands of light years. Worlds that once looked down on humanity now trembled. Treaties were rewritten, empires reconsidered expansion. And somewhere deep in uncharted space, a child born of a forgotten race woke screaming. He dreamed of a man with burning eyes, a man who broke the sky with his hands. Earth was no longer just a world. It was a warning. The temple had been kicked open. And inside, the gods had remembered who they were. The war wasn't coming. It had already been won by the ones who forgot they were gods and chose to remember.